Hello again, it's Allison of Spanish Zero, here to introduce you to our guest speaker, Brent Pearson, of Brent's Language Learning. We're often asked, before engaging in our listening method, is there a good commercially available course that can teach you some basics first? And though the course focuses mainly on speaking, we recommend the Paul Noble Spanish course available on Audible as a perfect companion to the Spanish Zero method, to study before or during your project of building vocabulary through listening. For languages that Paul Noble doesn't cover, we recommend looking into the Michel Thomas Method, but with some reservations. Here's Brent to tell you about the main differences between the two.
Today we're going to cover 4 reasons why Paul Noble is better than the Michel Thomas Method. They both start out with very basic phrases. They ask you to recall what those phrases are once they've said them to you. They do some pretty decent explaining of the language, and it's not terribly fast-paced. Sometimes in Michel Thomas, you'll have the instructor also give the models for the native speaker. With Paul Noble, it will always be him doing the instructing with a native speaker, doing the models for how to say something. Whereas with Michel Thomas, sometimes you're getting an instructor with a native speaker doing the model. Sometimes you are getting Michel Thomas himself. And then other times, like for instance with the Russian course, the instructor is also the native speaker of the language. And of the Michel Thomas courses that I've taken or sampled, I've done Michel Thomas Russian. The Russian native speaker instructor who also spoke English did a great job of explaining the language and modeling it. I listened to the first disc of Chinese, and I find it acceptable. I listened to Michel Thomas Spanish for 5 minutes, and I can't stand the way the guy speaks. And maybe I should have given it a better chance. So take that little evaluation of the Michel Thomas Spanish course with a grain of salt. If I were to, say, theoretically purchase the Paul Noble Russian course, which of course it doesn't exist, but I wish it did, I would do so with confidence that it would have the same quality as the French or Spanish course, because he follows the same model for his courses. So that's the biggest thing about Paul Noble, why I like him better, is because there's a consistency of quality. Secondly, there's a huge difference in the way they are structured, in that Paul Noble, he'll say, how do you say this in French? There will be a pause for you to speak the French, and then the native speaker will respond. And he inserts the pause into the recording. Michel Thomas does not. You have to pause the recording yourself. You do not want to do this while you're driving. So I can listen to Paul Noble and do the lesson the way it's supposed to be done, because he inserts pauses for you to speak. But when I'm listening to Michel Thomas Russian, either I have to make sure that I'm sitting at home in my office doing nothing else, or if I'm driving, that I'm just listening to it and not trying to say the stuff. In the Paul Noble course, once they've had that pause for you to answer, how do you say this in French? And you've made your guess, then the native speaker says it. So you can hear whether or not you got it right. And this is the way it should be done. They do a similar thing in Pimsleur, although it's a lot faster paced. But Michel Thomas, after they ask you, you hear some student try to say it, often making a mistake. Then either the instructor or the native speaker will say it correctly. This is just ridiculous that Michel Thomas does this. Why do I want to hear other people's mistakes when I'm learning? learn. I want to hear the perfect model. I want to start with the perfect model, and that's it. Of course, I'm not the first person to say this, but just in case you've never tried Michel Thomas, be warned, that's what you're in for, listening to a lot of student mistakes. So there you go. Consistency and quality, built-in pause, so you can easily do this while you're driving. Paul Noble does not subject you to listening to student mistakes. And Paul Noble courses are way less expensive. I like Paul Noble better than Michel Thomas, and this is why, in my opinion, it is the best way to start learning a language. And you're not going to master it from Paul Noble alone, but in my opinion, he's the best one as far as breaking into it. And Michel Thomas is second best with some serious reservations.
To the viewer, thanks for watching, and to Mr. Pearson, thank you for sharing your content with us on our channel. This has been a presentation of Spanish Zero. Make the foreign language your language too.